Hi everybody, George Dahl here, and welcome back to my film journal. Today I'm talking about the fourth film from the old subverter of expectations himself, Rian Johnson. It's a mystery film, a murder mystery, starring Daniel Craig and Ana de Armas in the tradition of Agatha Christie, with a few twists. So before we get started, let's discuss the bantha in the room. Had the infamous Star Wars The Last Jedi not been helmed by Johnson, I'm sure the narrative around this film would be, wow, another great genre effort from the promising indie director Rian Johnson, filmmaker behind Looper and Brick. Going into this movie, I think a lot of people were thinking, including me, can this guy redeem himself after the Star Wars debacle by returning to his home turf? And for me, the answer is happily yes. Not that Johnson has to grovel to me or other fans after his Star Wars 8 performance, and I know a lot of people really loathe The Last Jedi. I don't exactly hate it. I understand that there are things wrong with it, but I've probably rewatched it about 3 times on fast forward during a few sequences. But there's a lot to like there.
Now, I fear I was mistaken.
And going into his follow-up Knives Out, I was keeping an eye out for a repeat of certain foibles, tropes, traits, and themes that Johnson ported over and smuggled into The Last Jedi. Do they reappear here? Let's go through them one by one. Number 1, stubborn Arturism. Not at all to minimize the contribution of Richard Marquand and Irvin Kershner, who were the helmers of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, but their work on the series was very much in service of Lucas's overall vision. Considering Kathleen Kennedy and Disney had no overall plan, Johnson didn't exactly submit his will to the Star Wars mythology. As part of a cinematic whole, that being a trilogy, it doesn't really seem to fit or help to set up a third film. It's very much self-contained, and therefore committed many sins that appeared to break canon. Light-speed missile ships, anyone? But instead of working as a journeyman director for hire, Johnson set out to make a Star Wars film that could proudly sit within his oeuvre as a Rian Johnson movie. He's an auteur at heart, and he actually brings over a lot of the themes that we saw in The Last Jedi into Knives Out. But considering Knives Out is his baby, it's his film, it seems a little more appropriate, which brings us to crime number 2. Star Wars as political soapbox. In The Last Jedi, Johnson had a lot to say about gender roles, toxic masculinity, capitalism, and the military-industrial complex. And he smuggled his ideas into The Last Jedi in a manner which felt, to me, clumsy, but mostly inappropriate. Why did brave resistance pilot turned male chauvinist hothead Poe Dameron have to be ceremonially whipped at the altar of progressivism in such an indignant way? When you're working on a Star Wars movie, you're working on a tapestry. I mean, it's an epic poem. You're working together to do this. Keep your politics in your pocket and have some reverence for the source material and the tradition that you're part of. Do all that stuff in your own movie. And he does do it in Knives Out. And for the most part, it does work. Crime number 3. Subverting expectations. This has become a real sticking point for some fans, and I believe the misguided conceit that Johnson went into The Last Jedi trying to accomplish. I believe he even stated this multiple times. And Kathleen Kennedy has reiterated, we're trying to challenge fans, trying to subvert expectations, etc., etc. Johnson introduced so many contradictory moments into The Last Jedi that many believe he was doing it out of spite, as if he had contempt for the fans. And look, it's fun to subvert audience expectations. Twists are great. Here's a good one.
I am your father.
Here's a bad one. So when I heard Johnson was taking on the ensemble murder mystery genre, I'd figured he'd go down the same route. He would smugly shit all over the legacy of Agatha Christie, G.K. Chesterton, and Raymond Chandler, and let us all know how stupid, unimaginative, and closed-minded we were for clinging to those outdated conventions in the first place.
Hi, what is this? What's this arrangement?
Mr. Drysdale.
CSI KFC?
Well, I'm here to tell you guys this. The man does indeed subvert expectations. But it comes from a totally surprising and wholly original place. It really does work. Johnson is a smart guy, and he's a terrific writer. With Knives Out, he manages to deliver an ensemble murder mystery that can stand proudly in the pantheon alongside the greats, while at the same time, and this is the important part, he plays the structural conventions of the classic setup while still managing to deliver a taut, humorous, and wholly satisfying whodunit. So I am a casual fan of the murder mystery when it comes to literature. I'm really familiar with all the cinematic and theatrical adaptations of Agatha Christie's work, though I admit I've never read one of her stories. I do love books by Donald Westlake. I love Raymond Chandler, and I love Ross MacDonald. Far be it from me, a novice, to offer any historical insight into the murder mystery, but Johnson manages to craft a tight, intriguing, taut detective story in which the identity of the killer is revealed in the first act. I've never seen that before. Common knowledge would have you believe that in a mystery story, the detective should snoop about, interview the subjects, and sort of uncover clues along the way, and then at the very end reveal who the killer is in the parlor room. That's your crescendo, right? Well, I'll admit, Johnson does sort of have his cake and eat it too, but I won't say too much. It's good that he mixed it up. And with this twist, Johnson doesn't just deconstruct the genre, he gives it a shot in the arm. Very, very few mystery and crime films ever offer up a genuinely shocking and surprising revelation. But that's okay. We've sort of been conditioned in a post-Fight Club, post-M. Night Shyamalan, post-Nolan world to expect a twist to be mind-blowing. Nothing was as it seems. Oh my God, my world is shattered. But that's not true, because for me, in the detective genre, half the fun is getting there. What you're there to see is not so much the revelation of the killer. That's great. And if it's clever, even better, right? But the thing that's so great about mystery stories is that we are able to come into this world and be introduced to all these fascinating, different, and interesting characters through the lens of our detective or our protagonist. And I think our brains have been trained to appreciate only when we've been tricked. And that turns us into cynical viewers trying to outsmart the movie. Johnson instead alleviates the need many viewers might have to skip with a detective procedural and get to the end so I can see if I was right about the killer, because he removes the question early on, and this allows us to enjoy the movie. Because Johnson does real work to endear us to the killer, surprisingly, he moves the burden of suspense from, I wonder who the killer is, which forces us to pay a lot of attention to every little detail and clue that we see, and to also have our minds going and to be kind of taken out of the film, right? And he instead replaces that burden with suspense in the terms of, I hope the killer doesn't get caught, which is really intriguing. And it actually lets us sit back, enjoy the movie once that question has been alleviated so early on, and then sort of lets the interpersonal and family dramas play out. And I feel like Johnson really gets the genre in terms of his relationship to his characters in the story, because in my opinion, the fun is not so much the destination, but the friends we make along the way. And we do make some interesting, we do meet an interesting sort of coterie of miserable friends in this movie. The characters that populate detective dramas, the suspects, their wild personalities, occupations, relationships, and varying stations in life are what make the genre really interesting. And Johnson succeeds with flying colors here. Similar to the heist film, the detective mystery genre is one of the few stories in which the doling out of exposition is the highlight of the film. Writers generally agonize over the delivery of exposition. For most part, filmmaking should be about showing, not telling. We understand that Walter Matthau is an irresponsible bum in The Bad News Bears because we see it. There's no scene in which a narrator needs to appear and say, this guy has a drinking problem. But sometimes the info dump, as it's sometimes called, is unavoidable. It's a pill that must be sugar-coated, as Alfred Hitchcock famously said. But in the mystery genre, we can just flat out be told the information, which is a blatant contradiction of the show-don't-tell philosophy. It's a procedural part of the story, and we're interested in hearing it. This is because the good mystery stories often contain a lot of tawdry elements, generally dealing with rich people and their shameful breach of their austere identity. Be that connections to the underworld, lascivious sexual hang-ups, or secret foundational family crimes. All is not what it seems on the surface. In The Big Sleep, General Sternwood's daughter is mixed up in a prostitution ring and is being blackmailed. Tell us more. In Knives Out, the gossipy hook comes from our curiosity in hearing about how all the disparate family members relate to the apparent suicidal death of their father, the famed author Harlan Thrombey. We want to know what they do professionally, their foibles and hang-ups, and it's fun and voyeuristic to hear them all talk shit about one another and attribute humble brag praises to themselves. In a mystery film, the characters must be interesting, and Johnson's excellent cast delivers, bolstered by Johnson's whip-smart writing, which is filled to the brim with great little quips and asides. A real gift for an actor. It's like a stage play. Everything is heightened and over the top. All the members of the Thrombey family have unique costumes, attitudes, political beliefs, and motivations. They're well-rounded and they're fun, and we enjoy just hearing them talk, which is something that we eschew for action in most other films. The star of the movie, Daniel Craig, plays a southern version of Christie's Hercule Poirot.
You will find me a respectful, quiet, passive observer of the truth.
Here, Craig plays an equally as formidable gentleman detective, Benoit Blanc, an obvious parody or allusion to Holmes or Christie. He appears to be the unshakable force for law and justice. He's cool and collected, unorthodox and in control. His peculiar method of interrogation and deduction lend him gravitas.
I suspect
Foul play.
At first, Craig's affection of his southern dialect seemed a little cartoonish and distracting to me. And considering that we knew the culprit of the crime in the first act, I figured, what could this guy do but bumble about for the next hour and a half? Knowing what I do about Johnson's proclivity for subverting expectations, especially for when it comes to emasculating heroic male characters, I figured he was planning on turning the detective archetype into a joke. Just like we all supposedly had our minds blown about what constitutes a hero in The Last Jedi. Apparently being heroic doesn't involve death-defying, piloting stunts or a can-do personality. What it really requires is not telling anybody your plan,
being overly confrontational and dismissive to many of the people beneath you, and then sacrificing yourself at the end.
So I was pleasantly surprised that that's actually not what happened. The film does have fun at Craig's expense, and he bumbles about a little bit. But when it comes to unraveling a deeper meaning within the mystery that many people missed, Craig is allowed to have his final bow. So he treats Craig as an actor with a lot more respect than he does with Mark Hamill. I.e., he does actually get to solve the mystery at the end and isn't simply a hologram being projected across the galaxy by a guy doing force yoga and then who overexerts himself and then willingly dies. Let's talk politics.
The first time ever.
The movie is working on multiple levels. There are themes here and a lot of statements that Johnson's trying to make that are generally avoided by a lot of mystery movies. Most films are basically just surface level. But you have movies like Chinatown, which have a lot to say about capitalism, legacies of familial abuse, sexual abuse, and about corruption. Or you have a movie like Gone Baby Gone, which is about the morality of a detective and his commitment to his clients, as well as sort of the legitimacy of parental ownership over a child. But then you have a film like Guy Ritchie's Sherlock Holmes, which is basically just about Sherlock Holmes defeats the bad guy, and that's it. This film falls into the category of the latter. Knives Out is ultimately a movie about hereditary ownership, the legitimacy of it, and who has claim to it. It's surprisingly blatant and made manifest as not simply an age-old conundrum, but as a current issue by invoking Donald Trump. Yes, there is a sequence in which Don Johnson's character, Richard Drysdale, argues in favor of Donald Trump's immigration policy with Toni Collette. Collette plays what George Carlin would refer to as a Mr. and Mrs. Natural Fibers type. She meditates and promotes health and wellness, and not surprisingly advocates a laissez-faire approach to immigration, while expressing her hyperbolic fears about the rising Nazi hordes roaming the streets. She's your typical boomer liberal aunt on Twitter, and Johnson is your typical boomer right-wing uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. Every member of the Thornby family that's branded with a concrete political ideology, an identifiable ideology, including the two youngest members of the family, a young cousin, a guy who's labeled an alt-right troll, and another who's labeled a Marxist SJW, are ultimately straw man characters of basically the most bland and obvious political manifestation of those views. So they're mostly played for laughs, which actually keeps the film kind of lighthearted and fun. If one didn't want to dig deep enough, they might assume that these political battles, so abundant amongst actual families, but so absent from characters in films, are just stand-ins for disagreements that could have been about anything. Enter our sympathetic character of Marta Cabrera, played with grace and strength by Ana de Armas, a rising star who was such a bright spot in Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 24. Again, she plays a sort of chastened, put-upon victim who is eager to please. If Franco Zeffirelli were alive to restage a production of Jesus of Nazareth, he might as well have casted de Armas in the role of the Virgin Mary. While she's a fun protagonist, she's also so virtuous as to be almost unidentifiable with. When placed in context with the money-grubbing and vain Thrombies, she works as a foil as any hero might in a partisan political cartoon. She's the daughter of an illegal immigrant with a heart of gold, and has to suffer countless racial indignities. From the casual, no one can get her country of origin correct, to the blatant, she's called an anchor baby during a heated exchange with the family. For the most part, the family is casually kind to her without getting too close, but when it's revealed that she is the sole heir to the Thromby fortune, then the knives really come out, and the family shows their true colors. So there is a metaphor here. If the callous and entitled Thromby family are a symbol for the current white ruling class of America, who are fighting tooth and nail to preserve their unearned social station,
Hugh Drysdale? Call me Ransom, it's my middle name. Only the help calls me Hugh.
then Marta is the embodiment of the hardworking immigrants set to inherit the wealth of the country. Wealth in quotes. If that's true, then Johnson is viewing the concept of capital and wealth ownership in a predictably narrow way that we often see on the left. Either the metaphor doesn't exactly track, or Johnson conceives of wealth as a fixed pie, rather than something that continues to grow and benefit all people, the latter being the view that I take. I tend to believe that a rising tide generally lifts all boats. Rather than if some benefit, others must suffer. I think the historical record bears that out, and if you'd like to object, please comment below. While the Thrombies are a miserable coterie of entitled venial people, Johnson seems to take almost vindictive joy in their fate. Once booted from their home, they find the roles reversed. They now look helplessly up at Marta, who now has some sort of strange dominion over them. The final question that the film raises is this. Now that Marta is the beneficiary of Thromby's wealth, will she act in a beneficent way towards her lessers, or will she become vindictive? Will the cycle of violence continue? Would that be a good thing? I'm interested to know what Rian Johnson thinks, but I tend to believe that he thinks some people deserve their time in the barrel. I like Knives Out a lot. I'd also like to mention that we get an admirable performance from Chris Evans, who I imagine found it fun to stretch his bad guy muscles after a decade-long stint as America's Boy Scout. The cinematography was also terrific, and the production design outstanding, something that was really lacking in Johnson's earlier efforts, especially Looper, a movie with a lot of big ideas, but not necessarily the budget to pull them off. Well, that's what I thought. I would definitely recommend that you guys check out Knives Out. I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. It moves at a real fast pace, and it constantly keeps you guessing. 2 hours, 15 minutes, it flew by.
All of them lied to me. There is one guilty party behind it all.
You know something. Spill it.
Oh my God.
Tell me what happened to my grandfather.
I think you have something you want to tell me.
So, hey, guys, be back later. I'll have more video reviews for you in the future. Thanks for watching.